From intricate carvings to sprawling ruins, the silent story of ancient hierarchies waits to be told. The social structure of lost civilizations. Imagine walking through a vast, silent city, empty, overgrown, forgotten. Stone streets, once busy with life, now echo only with wind. The people are gone. The language is lost, and the structures, though crumbling, hint at something sophisticated. A society, once powerful, now erased by time. These are the lost civilizations. Indus Valley, ancient Mesopotamia, Olmecs, Minoans, and Göbekli Tepe. But they didn't vanish overnight. They thrived. For centuries, even millennia. They built cities, developed writing systems, performed rituals, traded across continents, and, most importantly, they organized themselves. They had rules, hierarchies, leaders, beliefs. They had a social structure. But what did that look like? Who ruled? Who worked? Were their societies fair or brutally divided? And the greatest mystery of all, how could such advanced systems collapse so completely? Today, we're peeling back the layers of time to examine how lost civilizations structured their societies, and why understanding these ancient hierarchies might reveal more about our own world than we think. Let's begin with the Indus Valley Civilization, also known as Harappan culture. It flourished over 4,000 years ago along the river plains of what is today Pakistan and northwest India. At its peak, it may have supported over 5 million people, more than many European civilizations at the time. But here's the puzzle. No kings, no palaces, no temples, no clear elite class. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, the Indus cities, like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, seem strikingly uniform. Their streets followed strict grids. Houses had standardized brick sizes. Almost every home had access to a private well and drainage, a level of urban planning that rivals modern cities. What kind of society creates equality in plumbing but leaves behind no monumental statues of rulers? Some scholars believe the Indus may have been an egalitarian society, with power shared between merchant guilds, priests, or councils. Others argue the elite simply ruled from the shadows or used ideology, not monuments, to control. But the truth is, we don't know. We can't read their writing. Their society may have been highly stratified or remarkably balanced. Still, the absence of overt hierarchy is just as telling as its presence. It challenges our assumptions about ancient power. Now travel west, to Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, where civilization is said to have begun. Here, society was anything but subtle. In cities like Ur and Babylon, power was visible everywhere. In ziggurats towering toward the sky, in laws carved in stone, in tombs filled with gold. At the top stood the king, often believed to be chosen by the gods, or even semi-divine. Below him, a priestly class controlled rituals and knowledge. Then came scribes, merchants, artisans, farmers, and finally, slaves. Mesopotamian society was rigid, but it was also organized, and astonishingly advanced. They created legal codes, like the famous Code of Hammurabi, which spelled out rules for everything from trade, to marriage, to punishment. An eye for an eye, it declared, but only if you were of equal status. Strike a noble, you're doomed. Strike a slave, pay a fine. Here, social class was carved into the legal fabric of life. And yet, this system lasted for centuries. Why? Because it worked. For those at the top. But when drought, invasion, and rebellion struck, the system proved brittle. Hierarchies built on control tend to collapse hard. Now picture the island of Crete, home to the enigmatic Minoans. Their palaces, especially the labyrinthine complex at Knossos, suggest a culture obsessed with ceremony, art, and myth. Minoan frescoes show dancing women, sea creatures, bulls, but rarely warfare. Some scholars believe Minoan society was unusually peaceful and possibly matriarchal, with women holding high social or religious status. If true, that would make the Minoans a rare exception in the ancient world. But here too, evidence is thin. Much of what we know comes from art and architecture. We don't fully understand their script, linear A, so the story of their social order is incomplete. A volcanic eruption, followed by invasions, likely spelled their end. The rising Mycenaeans, more warlike, more hierarchical, took their place. A peaceful society overtaken by a more violent one. A pattern history knows too well. And finally, deep in the jungles of Mesoamerica, we find the Olmecs, the earliest known major civilization in Mexico. They left behind colossal stone heads, each weighing over 20 tons, each depicting an individual, perhaps a ruler or warrior. Olmec society appears to have been stratified, with a powerful elite class controlling religion, trade, and the labor of thousands. Their ceremonial centers weren't cities, but religious hubs, suggesting a theocratic society where priests and rulers were one and the same. They also laid the groundwork for future civilizations, like the Maya and Aztec, who developed even more complex social hierarchies, complete with dynasties, warrior classes, tribute systems, and human sacrifice. To the Olmecs and their successors, society and cosmos were linked. The king wasn't just a man, he was a cosmic force, a bridge between worlds. But even this divine structure couldn't withstand environmental change, overpopulation, or internal conflict. So what do these vanished worlds tell us? Some were rigid, others fluid. Some ruled by kings, others by councils, or perhaps no one at all. Some relied on fear, others on belief. But all had systems, all had social structures. And when those structures became too inflexible, too unequal, or too dependent on fragile conditions, they broke. And with them, whole civilizations disappeared. So here's the question. If the rise and fall of civilizations depends so much on how we organize ourselves, what does our own structure say about our future? Are we building something that can last, or something that will someday be rediscovered, broken and overgrown, by those who wonder, what were they thinking? Secrets beneath the streets. The social structure of the Indus Valley civilization in the dry, windswept plains of modern-day Pakistan and northwest India lie the crumbling ruins of one of the most advanced civilizations of the ancient world, and one of its greatest mysteries. This is the Indus Valley civilization, a society that flourished over 4,500 years ago, thriving for centuries, and then, seemingly without warning, vanished. But unlike Egypt, where pharaohs ruled with godlike power, or Mesopotamia, where kings etched their names in stone, the Indus left behind no grand monuments to their rulers. No palaces, no tombs, no battle carvings, no temples. What they did leave behind is something far more intriguing. Cities, meticulously planned, astonishingly clean, and eerily uniform. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't random. This was organization. This was design. And it's led archaeologists to ask a haunting question. Who ran this civilization, and why did they seem to avoid showing their power? Let's take a walk through Mohenjo-Daro, one of the largest Indus cities. Laid out on a near-perfect grid, the city is divided into blocks, with wide streets, narrow lanes, and houses made from standardized bricks. Bricks so consistent in size, they suggest a central authority enforcing building codes, and inside these homes, private wells, indoor toilets, covered drainage systems. Yes, you heard that right. Indoor plumbing. In 2500 BC, at the center of the city lies the mysterious Great Bath, a massive brick-lined tank that may have been used for ritual purification. It's surrounded by what appear to be public buildings, but again, number inscriptions, no statues, no names. No one seems to have claimed credit. And unlike other ancient cities, there's no towering palace dominating the skyline, no temple rising above the rooftops, no tombs filled with gold or royal regalia. It's as if the Indus people went out of their way not to glorify any individual. So, what kind of society was this? Some scholars suggest the Indus Valley was unusually egalitarian for its time. Think about it. Uniform housing sizes with only modest variation, shared access to water and sanitation, a lack of elite burials or grandiose tombs. In Mesopotamia, kings inscribed their deeds in cuneiform for the gods and future generations. In Egypt, rulers built pyramids to reach the afterlife. But in the Indus, no names survived, no great battles, no royal lineages. Instead, power may have rested in merchant guilds, priestly councils, or civic assemblies, a decentralized system where decision-making was shared, not hoarded. Or perhaps it was a society governed by ideology rather than ego, a place where religion, ritual, and practicality blended seamlessly into daily life. They didn't build to impress, they built to function. Now, to be clear, egalitarian doesn't mean equal in every sense. There were certainly divisions. Some houses were larger than others. Some artifacts, like jewelry, carved seals, and imported goods, hint at status differences, but even their art is quiet. Their figurines are small, humble, personal. Their seals, beautifully carved, depict animals, mythological creatures, and script, but they don't show scenes of war or conquest. There are no kings trampling enemies beneath their chariots. In fact, we don't even know what their writing says. Despite hundreds of examples of the Indus script, it remains undeciphered. No Rosetta Stone, no bilingual inscriptions. Their silence, both literal and symbolic, makes them all the more mysterious. Here's another fascinating clue: standardized weights and measures. Across cities, hundreds of miles apart, archaeologists have found identical measuring stones and systems of weight. This points to a highly regulated economy, likely based on trade and central oversight. So how does a civilization manage this kind of uniformity without a king or a visible ruling class? Some suggest the Indus operated like a corporate state, managed by a coalition of merchants, religious leaders, or elders, focused not on domination, but on efficiency, hygiene, and balance. They didn't build armies, they built systems. They didn't carve their names in stone. They shaped society itself, but of course, no system is immune to collapse. Around 1900 BCE, signs of decline begin to appear. Trade routes falter, cities shrink, buildings become shoddier, people move eastward, abandoning the great cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. What happened? Theories range from climate change, to tectonic shifts altering river paths, to drought, to overuse of resources, or even invasion. But without written records, the truth remains elusive. One thing is certain: the social structure that once held the Indus together, whatever it was, eventually failed to adapt. And when it did, an entire civilization faded from view. Yet their legacy lingers, in their bricks, in their drains, in their silence. The Indus Valley civilization challenges our assumptions about ancient power. It asks us to consider a society where order wasn't built on fear, or violence, or monumental ego, but on planning, cooperation, and perhaps a deeper sense of communal life. They remind us that greatness doesn't always wear a crown, that civilization doesn't need kings to thrive, and that sometimes the most powerful forces in history leave behind no face, no name, and no words, just evidence and questions. What would our cities look like 4,000 years from now if we disappeared? Would our structures speak of fairness, of sustainability, of wisdom, or would they, like the Indus, leave future archaeologists wondering, who were these people, and how did they live so well, for so long, without a king? Power and order, the social structure of ancient Mesopotamia, long before the rise of Greece or Rome, before the pyramids pierced the Egyptian sky. There was Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, cradled by the Tigris and Euphrates. This region gave birth to some of humanity's first cities, first laws, first written words. But Mesopotamia was more than just a birthplace of civilization. It was a land of power, structured, codified, and enforced. A land where your place in society determined everything: your work, your worth, and even your punishment. Today, we descend into the world of ziggurats and clay tablets to uncover the rigid social hierarchy of ancient Mesopotamia, a civilization built on order, obedience, and inequality. Imagine a city like Ur or Babylon around 2000 BCE. Towering over mud brick homes and bustling marketplaces stands the ziggurat, a stepped temple rising toward the heavens. At the top of this social and spiritual mountain sits a single figure, the king. But in Mesopotamia, a king wasn't just a man with an army. He was the representative of the gods on earth, the divine middleman between mortals and the cosmic forces that controlled fate. He issued laws, commanded armies, led rituals, and managed irrigation, the lifeblood of agriculture. But even the king answered to someone, the gods, and managing their will on earth was a full-time job, shared with the next class down, the priests. The priesthood in Mesopotamia was immensely powerful. Priests controlled temples, which weren't just places of worship, they were economic powerhouses. Temples owned land, collected grain, stored surpluses, and even managed trade. In many cities, the temple complex was the administrative center, where records were kept on thousands of clay tablets. And who wrote those records? The scribes, highly educated elites, trained in cuneiform, the world's first writing system. To read and write was to have power, and that power was closely guarded. Below the scribes and priests stood the nobility, landowners, generals, high-ranking officials. They lived in larger homes, closer to the city center, and enjoyed wealth passed down through generations. And then, there were the merchants and artisans, the economic engine of Mesopotamia. They crafted pottery, wove textiles, and forged tools. They traded grain, livestock, lapis lazuli, and timber, some goods coming from as far as the Indus Valley and Anatolia. Merchants had a unique place in Mesopotamian society. They weren't royalty, but they could become wealthy. They weren't priests, but they were essential to the temple economy. Their success relied on connections, contracts, and the favor of the gods. Contracts, by the way, were everywhere, written on clay tablets, baked hard in the sun. Everything from marriages to debt to business deals was documented. In a world as hierarchical as this, documentation was protection and control. But as we descend further down the ladder, life becomes harder. The farmers made up the vast majority of the population. They worked the fields owned by temples, nobles, or the king. They paid taxes in grain. They followed the agricultural calendar with near-religious devotion, planting, harvesting, irrigating. Then came the laborers, builders, canal diggers, porters. Hard work, little reward. And at the very bottom, the slaves. Slavery in Mesopotamia was not based on race. Slaves were prisoners of war, criminals, or people who had fallen into debt. Some were born into it. Some could buy their freedom. They worked in households, temples, farms, and had virtually no legal standing. But what's most striking is how clearly this hierarchy was built into law. Take the famous Code of Hammurabi, carved into stone around 1754 BCE, one of the earliest legal codes in history. It declared, if a noble strikes another noble, he pays a fine. If a noble strikes a commoner, the fine is smaller. If a noble strikes a slave, no fine at all. Justice, it seems, was not blind. It wore the robes of class. And what about gender? In the early periods, women in Mesopotamia could own property, run businesses, and appear in court. Some served as priestesses, a highly respected role. A few royal women even wielded political power behind the scenes. But over time, women's rights began to erode. Later, codes restricted their behavior. A wife accused of adultery could be drowned in the river. A daughter could be sold to pay off debts. Veiling laws began to appear, signaling the control of female bodies and mobility. Marriage, too, was a contract, usually arranged, almost always unequal. Still, in the world of goddesses like Inanna and Ishtar, women retained symbolic power, even as real power slipped through their fingers. Why was this society so rigid? The answer lies in the very nature of Mesopotamian life. Floods could destroy crops. Invasions were common. Disease, drought, famine, all constant threats. Order, both social and cosmic, had to be maintained at all costs. A rigid hierarchy wasn't just tradition, it was survival. Each person had a role to play. Disrupting that order risked chaos, and chaos was death. From king to slave, everyone existed within this framework, written in clay, reinforced by belief, and guarded by law. And yet, Mesopotamia thrived for thousands of years. From Sumer to Akkad, from Babylon to Assyria, dynasties rose and fell, but the social structure endured. Cities grew, empires expanded, knowledge advanced. They gave us writing, law, astronomy, literature, and the blueprint of urban society. But they also gave us hierarchy, injustice, control. The echoes of Mesopotamian order still ripple through our world today, in how we govern, how we punish, how we divide labor, wealth, and power. So when we look back at the ziggurats of yore, when we read the cuneiform etched into clay, we're not just seeing a vanished world, we're seeing the foundations of our own, palaces and power. The social worlds of the Minoans and Mycenaeans. In the sapphire waters of the Aegean Sea lie two worlds, two civilizations separated by myth, yet connected by history, the Minoans of Crete and the Mycenaeans of mainland Greece. One built labyrinthine palaces, adorned with frescoes of dolphins and dancers. The other raised citadels of stone, armed with spears and shrouded in tales of war. One vanished mysteriously, the other left behind epics. But beneath the art and the ruins, both cultures reveal something deeper. How ancient societies built their social worlds, how they organized power, worship, gender, and class. Today, we dive into the palatial corridors of Knossos and Mycenae to uncover the social structures of two of the most fascinating civilizations of the Bronze Age. Let's begin on the island of Crete, around 2000 BC. Here, in a fertile land kissed by warm winds and protected by the sea, rose the Minoans, Europe's first advanced civilization. At the heart of their society stood the palace, not just a royal residence, but a center of economy, religion, and administration. The largest of these was Knossos, sprawling over 6 acres, with more than 1,000 interconnected rooms. To the ancient Greeks, it was the labyrinth, home of the Minotaur. To archaeologists, it's a clue to a society remarkably complex, and perhaps surprisingly peaceful. Unlike other Bronze Age cultures, the Minoans left behind no massive walls, no fortresses guarding their cities. Instead, they built open courtyards, vibrant frescoes, and grand staircases. Their art celebrated nature, dance, ritual, not war. And this has led to one of the most debated ideas in archaeology. Were the Minoans a matriarchal society? Minoan art often features women in prominent roles. Women appear larger than men in frescoes, leading processions, holding sacred snakes, performing rituals. Their most famous symbol, the snake goddess, shows a bare-breasted woman holding serpents, standing tall, powerful, unafraid. Could women have held religious, even political power? Some scholars believe so, that the Minoans may have been matrilineal, where lineage and inheritance passed through the female line, that priestesses may have wielded authority equal to, or greater than, male rulers. But others caution, art is not always truth. Just because women are shown in ritual doesn't mean they ruled. Still, even a symbolic emphasis on feminine power is notable in a world otherwise dominated by male kings and warrior elites. Whatever the case, Minoan society seems to have been more fluid, more ceremonial, and perhaps more egalitarian than many of its contemporaries. Now travel north, across the sea, to the rocky hills of the Greek mainland. Here, around 1600 BCE, the Mycenaeans were rising. They were everything the Minoans were not. Fortified, armed, patriarchal, proud. Their cities, like Mycenae, Pylos and Tiryns, were crowned by citadels, with massive stone walls and narrow gates. Where the Minoans painted dolphins, the Mycenaeans carved lions. Where Minoan palaces were open, Mycenaean palaces were fortresses. This was a warrior society, built on conquest, tribute, and control. At the top stood the vanish, the king, surrounded by a court of administrators, scribes, and military elites. Like the Minoans, the Mycenaeans used Linear B, an early form of Greek writing, mainly for record-keeping. From these clay tablets, we learn about their social hierarchy. The vanish, or king, was the supreme ruler. The laujatas was a war leader, or noble, second in command. Then came a tier of officials, scribes, craft specialists, and priests. At the base, farmers, laborers, and slaves. Everyone had a role, and the palace controlled it all. Palatial centers like Pylos were administrative machines. Every crop was recorded, every tribute counted, every worker listed. The economy was redistributive, meaning resources flowed to the palace, then out again to the people in the form of rations, land, or goods. This system required intense bureaucracy, with scribes copying everything onto wet clay. You might imagine Bronze Age Greece as chaotic or heroic, but the tablets tell a different story. A story of order, taxation, control. Even religious life was structured. The Mycenaeans worshipped a pantheon of gods, many of whom would later appear in Greek mythology, including Zeus, Poseidon, and Hera. But their rituals were managed by palace-sanctioned priests and priestesses, a formalized role, often inherited. Women in Mycenaean society could hold religious positions, but the overall tone of the society was male-dominated, militaristic, and status-based. And yet, for all their differences, the Minoans and Mycenaeans were not strangers. They traded, they influenced one another. Minoan art appears in Mycenaean palaces, Mycenaean weapons appear in Crete. But around 1450 BCE, something shifted. The Minoan palaces were burned. Knossos fell under Mycenaean control. Some believe the Mycenaeans invaded. Others argue internal strife or natural disaster paved the way. What's clear is this: by the time the Mycenaeans took over Crete, the balance of power and the social order had changed. Gone were the open courtyards and feminine symbols. In came the warrior kings and fortress mines. The Minoan world was fading, but the Mycenaeans wouldn't last forever either. Around 1200 BCE, the entire eastern Mediterranean experienced a collapse. Palaces were abandoned. Writing disappeared. Trade halted. This was the end of the Bronze Age. Some blame invasion, others cite internal revolt, drought, or a perfect storm of disaster. With the fall of the palaces, the carefully managed social hierarchies crumbled, and for the next few centuries, Greece entered a dark age, a time without kings, without writing, without memory. Yet even in this silence, the echoes of these civilizations endured. The Minoans and Mycenaeans helped shape the world that would become classical Greece. Their myths became epics. Their gods became legends. Their palaces became ruins. And then, inspiration. They offer us two visions of ancient society. One, ceremonial, sea-bound, possibly matriarchal, where power flowed through ritual and symbol. The other, militant, hierarchical, and administrative, where power was seized, recorded, and controlled. Together, they show us that civilization is not a single story, but a tapestry of choices, environments, beliefs, and systems. And though their stones have fallen, the questions they raise still stand. What kind of society do we build when we have power? Who do we honor? Who do we forget? And how long before even the strongest palace crumbles into dust? Gods among men, power and society in the world of the Olmecs and early Maya in the lush lowlands of Mesoamerica. Before the rise of the Aztecs, before the golden age of the Maya, there lived a people whose colossal stone heads still watch over the earth in silence. They are the Olmecs, known to many as the mother culture of Mesoamerica. And following in their footsteps came the early Maya, builders of pyramids, keepers of time, and worshippers of gods who walked among men. But these were not simple farmers or village dwellers. These were societies built around ritual, cosmic order, and a belief that rulers were not just men, they were divine. Today, we uncover the social structures of the Olmecs and early Maya, a world where kings became gods, priests spoke the will of the universe, and labor was a sacred offering to the heavens. Let us begin with the Olmecs, who flourished along the Gulf Coast of what is now southern Mexico. From around 1600 BCE to 400 BCE, at the heart of Olmec society were the colossal heads, massive stone sculptures, some weighing up to 50 tons, each with unique facial features, helmets, and expressions. Who were they? Most scholars believe these were portraits of ruler gods, divine kings who served as intermediaries between the people and the supernatural world. Olmec rulers weren't just political figures. They were cosmic actors in a universe governed by balance, duality, and sacrifice. To rule was to perform, to mediate between life and death, the heavens and the earth. And to maintain this balance, the entire society was structured to support these sacred roles. The elite class in Olmec society, composed of rulers, priests, and nobles, lived in ceremonial centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta. These were not cities in the modern sense, but ritual capitals, filled with earthen pyramids, plazas, and altars. Here, priests conducted ceremonies tied to astronomy, agriculture, and the divine calendar. They interpreted omens, conducted bloodletting rituals, and oversaw the spiritual health of the land. Below them were the craft specialists, skilled artisans who carved jade masks, polished obsidian tools, and sculpted the very heads that watched over the land. And at the base of this social structure, the laborers and farmers, they cleared swamps, built mounds, planted maize. Their work wasn't just economic, it was ritual. Every act of cultivation, every stone lifted, was an offering to the gods and their earthly avatars. Now move forward in time, to around 1000 BCE, and journey deeper into the jungles of what is now Guatemala and southern Mexico. Here, in the shadows of thick canopies, the early Maya began to rise. At sites like El Mirador and Cerro Maya, we see the birth of something truly extraordinary. Cities, monumental pyramids, and the early signs of one of the most advanced civilizations of the ancient world. Like the Olmecs, the Maya were obsessed with the sky, with time, cycles, and cosmic order. But they took it even further. They developed the long count calendar, one of the most precise in history. They invented a full writing system, inscribing their history in stone and codices. And at the center of it all stood the Koul Ajol, the Holy Lord, a ruler imbued with divine essence. To be a Maya king in the early period was to be the axis mundi, the world tree connecting the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. His blood nourished the gods. His body performed the cosmos. His very breath was sacred. Kings were often shown wearing elaborate headdresses, holding scepters, surrounded by glyphs that declared their power and divine right. But he did not rule alone. The elite priesthood surrounded the king, forming a powerful, educated class. They were astronomers, scribes, ritual specialists, the keepers of time and prophecy. They conducted bloodletting ceremonies, offered incense, and interpreted the will of the gods through celestial alignments and sacred texts. These rituals weren't optional. They were necessary for the universe to function. If the right rituals weren't performed at the right time, the sun might not rise, the crops might fail, the rain might vanish. Society was held together not just by swords or trade, but by cosmic obligation. Supporting this divine hierarchy were the commoners, farmers, builders, artisans, and laborers. They constructed the great pyramids and temples not out of fear, but often out of duty, to their gods, their king. Their ancestors' agricultural work followed sacred calendars. Harvest festivals were tied to celestial events. Communal labor, known as tekio, was expected, even sacred. And just like the Olmecs, labor was not simply toil, it was an act of devotion. Below the commoners were the servants and slaves, often war captives or those in debt. Some served in royal courts, others were sacrificed in rituals, their blood believed to open portals between worlds. It's brutal by modern standards, but to the early Maya, sacrifice was not cruelty, it was divine exchange. And what about gender in these societies? In both Olmec and early Maya worlds, male rulers dominated political and ritual life, but women were not absent. In Maya art and inscriptions, we see elite women performing rituals, ruling as regents, and managing noble households. In some cases, royal women served as priestesses, midwives, or astronomers, their roles tightly woven into the spiritual life of the city. The divine feminine was present in goddesses like Exchel, patroness of fertility, water, and medicine. So while these were not fully equal societies, they recognized the power of women, especially within the sacred together. The Olmecs and early Maya crafted civilizations unlike any others in the ancient world. Societies where the cosmic and the political were one, where labor was ritual, where kings were gods, and where every class from priest to farmer played a role in sustaining the balance of the universe. Their structures were hierarchical, yes, but they were also deeply spiritual, symbolic, and tied to a larger sense of cosmic order. In their world, society wasn't just about power, it was about meaning. Every pyramid, every calendar, every drop of blood meant something. Today, the jungles have swallowed many of their cities, the stone heads stand silent, the temples lie broken, but the legacy of their social order remains. They remind us that civilization is not only built with laws and armies, but with myth, belief, and shared visions of the cosmos, and that sometimes the most powerful kings aren't the ones who command armies, but the ones who claim to speak for the stars. Echoes of order. Comparing the social structures of lost civilizations, they built cities of stone and clay. They organized labor, ruled through religion, and recorded time in stars and symbols. And yet, they are silent now. The Indus Valley, Mesopotamia, Minoans, Mycenaeans, Olmecs, and early Maya, each rose to bring, each carved their own unique vision of society, each vanished in their own time. We call them lost civilizations, but what does that really mean? And what patterns emerge when we look at how they lived, ruled, and believed? Today, we step back to compare, analyze, and ask the deeper questions. What do these civilizations tell us about ourselves? And how do we even know what we think we know? First, let's look at what they shared. Despite oceans and continents between them, many of these ancient civilizations developed similar social hierarchies. At the top, always, a ruling elite, sometimes a king, like the Wainacs of the Mycenaeans, or the Lugal of Mesopotamia, sometimes a priest-king, as in the Olmec or Maya worlds, where political and spiritual authority were fused, and in rare cases, like the Indus Valley, no obvious rulers at all, but still, signs of incredible central coordination. Beneath them, the administrators, priests, scribes, merchants, and artisans. The middle class, powerful, educated, essential. At the bottom, the farmers, laborers, and slaves, The ones who built the palaces, dug the canals, fed the cities, often unseen in the art, but always the foundation of everything. These pyramids of power appear again and again, across time, across geography. Why? Because complex societies require organization, coordination, labor, food storage, defense, ritual, and that requires structure, often enforced by myth, law, and fear. But within that shared structure, each society expressed power differently. In Mesopotamia, kings wrote their laws in stone. They conquered neighbors, recorded their victories, and built ziggurats to prove their might. In the Indus Valley, power was subtle, found in standardized bricks, clean streets, and the absence of glorified rulers, an egalitarian ideal, or a lost elite hiding in plain sight. The Minoans celebrated nature and dance, elevating women in art and ritual, a society possibly shaped around symbolic balance rather than military control. The Mycenaeans, by contrast, celebrated war, hierarchy, and the sword. Kings reigned behind thick walls. Their palaces were record-keeping machines. The Olmecs and early Maya saw rulers as living gods, their blood a cosmic bridge, their rule a divine necessity. Their cities were ritual theaters where performance sustained the universe. So while the form of hierarchy may repeat, the philosophy behind it changes, shaped by geography, environment, and belief. But then comes the next question. What makes these societies lost? They weren't forgotten because they were insignificant. They were forgotten because of time, silence, and collapse. In some cases, like the Indus, they left behind no deciphered writing. Their cities are mute, no kings, no dates, no history books. In others, like the Maya or Mycenaeans, their records exist, but in fragments, buried beneath centuries of jungle or earth. War, drought, earthquake, rebellion, each played a role in their fall. But it's not just about destruction, it's about interruption. When writing stops, when trade ceases, when monumental building ends, a civilization slips from memory, especially if no one is left to tell its story. And yet, we are slowly learning to listen. Through archaeology, linguistics, science, and even satellite imaging, we're uncovering their stories, piece by piece. We read clay tablets, decode ancient scripts, and analyze pollen from thousands of years ago to understand climate and agriculture. We map trade routes through obsidian and jade. We date bones, bricks, and charcoal with precision. We rebuild temples in 3D. We simulate economies. We compare myths passed down orally for millennia. Even trash, yes, trash, tells us how these people lived, their diets, their diseases, their tools, their trade. What we know is growing. What we still don't know is vast. But here's what's most profound. These civilizations were not primitive. They were engineered, intentional, and self-aware. They asked big questions. Why are we here? Who rules? And why? How do we honor the divine? How do we organize ourselves to survive? And in each case, they built answers into their social structures, sometimes through kings, sometimes through gods, sometimes through laws, rituals, or stone, but always through people, through belief, through cooperation and control. So what do these patterns tell us? That civilizations rise through the balance of order and innovation, through shared myths and structured labor, through the ability to coordinate masses and still keep them believing. But they fall when that balance cracks, when environment shifts, when power overreaches, when complexity becomes vulnerability. And what makes them lost is not the collapse itself, but the silence that follows, the unwritten names, the abandoned cities, the buried scripts. Yet they're not truly gone. Their influence lives on, in our cities, calendars, religions, and hierarchies, in how we govern, how we divide labor, how we imagine power, and in the questions we still ask. Can a society survive without kings? Must belief be tied to control? Is hierarchy inevitable? And when we vanish, what will they say about us? Conclusion: the living echoes of lost civilizations, from the riverbanks of the Indus to the jungles of Mesoamerica, from the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the citadels of the Mycenaeans, we've explored the social blueprints of civilizations long vanished. And yet, are they really gone? Because when we look closely at how we divide labor, how we worship, how we govern, how we build cities and pass down stories, we're not starting from scratch, we're continuing a legacy. The hierarchies, the rituals, the belief in divine leadership, the organization of the elite and the laboring class, they echo, sometimes loudly, in our modern systems, in governments run by the few, in economic systems that rely on invisible hands and visible pyramids of power, in religions where leaders still speak for the divine. We see the same questions being asked, and sometimes the same answers being repeated. Who holds power? Who serves? Who gets remembered? But we also have something those ancient civilizations didn't: perspective, the ability to look back, to learn, compare, question, and imagine differently. What if we could build societies that preserve complexity without collapsing under it? What if we learned from the sustainability of the Indus Valley, the ritual integration of the Maya, the spiritual symbolism of the Minoans? What if we could take the best of their social ingenuity and leave behind the exploitation, the inequality, the silence? The ruins whispered to us not just about how to survive, but how to structure meaning, how to bind people together or drive them apart. And in a time when our own societies are grappling with identity, justice, climate, and collapse, there's never been a better moment to listen, to learn from the past, not just to admire it, but to shape a different kind of future. So if this journey through ancient social worlds made you think, question, or wonder, subscribe for more deep dives into lost civilizations, unsolved mysteries, and what the past reveals about our present. Want to explore further? Check out our reading list and sources in the description, and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think makes a society thrive or fall? Because history isn't just what happened, it's what we choose to remember, and how we use it to build what comes next.